You're listening to Big World Network.
Phineas Frakture and the Dolonites, Episode 3. Written by Joseph Gatch, read by Michael Young. "Thank you for remembering tonight, Finn," Abigail said as they left the show. "Usually I have to remind you 3 or 4 times before you put it at the top of your to-do list." "Yes, well, I had some assistance in that realm, in the way of Mrs. Popkiss, Patterson, and my entire class. It was a conspiracy, I tell you. I can't imagine why everyone was making such a fuss about a show." Abigail Bentley looked hurt for a moment, and then composed herself, knowing that this absent-minded professor that she was in love with couldn't be to blame. "Is it because it is the anniversary of the day we met? Possibly?" Phineas arched his right eyebrow and looked at her with curiosity. Her dark brown eyes pleaded with him to remember. "So, we are celebrating the day that you ran over me with that 2-wheeled contraption you were riding, and the 4 hours after, when you followed me around, asking me if I was all right half the time, and cursing me the other half. You are a sentimental one, are you not?" Abigail punched him in the arm and smiled. "You make it sound like an awful day, you sot." "It was for me. I limped for a week." She patted his cheek. "Poor thing. That's what you get for walking in the middle of the road with your nose buried in schematics." "Yes, and you have been a pain in my backside ever since," Phineas retorted. "Is that who I think it is?" said Abigail, pointing down the avenue. "What is William doing here? Checking up to see if you remembered?" "He said that he had a parts dealer in the city. The dealer must be nearby, or he waited around to see if I remembered. Why must everyone take an interest in my personal life? If we hurry, we might be able to run off before he notices us. Knowing him, he will wish to join us for dinner." "Behave yourself. William is your dearest friend." William spotted the pair, obviously after a serious scan of the theater front, and, after catching a wave from Abigail, he waved back and began making his way towards them. Something caught Phineas's attention, which suddenly caught Abigail's. "Phineas, what's wrong?" His body froze as his eyes searched the street. Then he saw the pedestrians beginning to move in a wave in their direction. Screams carried down the street towards them as the panic grew. He watched as the wave passed and the street cleared. Then he saw them, 4 lumbering behemoths in the center of the street. Each had 2 men in their grasp. Some of the men were struggling, others were limp as a rag doll, either from fear or punishment. Their quarry caught, the Dolonites began to turn back to whence they came. Phineas heard the wheezing tanks as they began to move away. His eyes never left them, either fear or fascination, or both rooting him to where he stood. Finally, Abigail shook him from his trance. "William? Where's William? He didn't come through with the others." Abigail quickly looked around for their friend. "Oh my God, they have William!" She pointed towards the trailing Dolonite, and, as she said, there was William being dragged behind. Phineas watched as the Dolonites pulled William and the others along. "Are you just going to stand there? Aren't you going to do something?" He was frozen to the spot, completely helpless. "There's nothing to do. We cannot stop them," Phineas said with resignation. "You're not even going to try?" Abigail began looking for something to use as a weapon. Phineas took her by the arm and held her tight. "They cannot be stopped. If we try, we will die. He is lost to us now." "He is your friend. How can you say that? Don't you have any feelings for him?" "It's not that, Abigail. I've seen what they're capable of. I know that there is no hope." He watched the disappointment on her face grow. She was a woman who took matters into her own hands. She built some of the finest machines in the Empire and was a fearless pilot. He, on the other hand, was a professor. Just a professor, never in harm's way, never taking a risk. He knew nothing about fighting, and, if truth be told, he was a coward in most people's eyes. Let's follow them at least, from a safe distance. Maybe we can find where they're going and determine a course of action. Abigail smiled at this. At least it was something. Anything that would feel like they were taking action. They gave the Dolanites a fairly good head start in order to avoid detection, which was a difficult task at the rate they moved. A slow, steady pace was all they could afford until they reached the alley, and the Dolanites were gone. The pair quickly checked the few doors that were available to them. All were locked, and the alley that they were in ended in a wall. There was no way in or out except the way they had come, and the doors. The duo exited the alley and inspected the building fronts. Both were shops. One was a seamstress, the other a cobbler. Perplexing, to say the least, said Phineas. We must be missing something here. He removed a stick of chalk from his breast pocket and X'd the brick wall of the alley. Abigail gave him a disdaining look. Do you always carry that? Of course. What woman can't resist the alluring smell of chalk dust? He replied. Come on. We need to get back to my lab and pick up a few things. Shouldn't we wait till daylight? Find someone to go with us? Abigail asked. Then, as she watched his face, it dawned on her. I get it. This is a puzzle to you, and you hate not knowing. That, and, well, as you said, William needs our help. He also has my coil, which I paid him in advance for, and we're not going to lose that. Phineas quickly added to cover up any sentiment. Right, she answered, obviously seeing through his transparent effort. Phineas burst through the door of his lab, startling Mrs. Popkiss as she was dusting off some of his clutter. I thought I told you never to tidy up here, he said, as he began digging through boxes. Do you think that the dust just magically disappears in here, and that it's simply afraid to be around your abrasive charm? She quickly retorted. He shook his head as he continued tossing box after box aside. Ah, Miss Bentley, did you enjoy the show? Or did this lout leave you at your doorstep waiting for him again? No, ma'am. We actually had a very nice time, and that isn't until William was taken by those brutes. Mrs. Popkiss' eyes widened in terror. No, they didn't take poor William. She knew full well who Abigail was referring to as those brutes. How many others? At least 6, that we could see. We marked the alley in which they disappeared, and we are planning a rescue. That is, when he finds out what he's looking for. How is he handling this? The housekeeper added, nodding towards the rummaging professor. He was hesitant at first, but now he seems determined to see it through. Why? Phineas stood up and swung a large rifle towards them. I found it, he proclaimed, as the two women dove for cover. No time for games, ladies. We have no time to lose. He grabbed 2 lanterns off the wall, set them aside, and rummaged through the desk and pulled out a revolver. Handing that to Abigail, he turned to Mrs. Popkiss. If we are not back by noon tomorrow, consider yourself unemployed. With that, he picked up his pocket belt and one of the lanterns and rushed out the door. Famous last words, I expect. I shall keep them in my heart forever, she called after him. Abigail just grasped her hand and gave a weak smile. Keep him safe, dear. You know he shoots worse than he remembers things. I will, Mrs. Popkiss. That's why I let him keep the bigger gun. After Abigail had left to follow after Phineas, and Mrs. Popkiss had returned to tidying up the lab, she stopped for a moment and raised her eyes, which were full of tears. Please watch over them tonight. The boy is stronger than he thinks. Let him use his talents he has to fight his demons.
You're listening to Big World Network.